session's guest lecture, and we wait another 2 minutes to commence this webinar.
We are going to start the webinar. Greetings from Society of Extension Professionals, Extension Education Institute, Hyderabad team. It's our pleasure to organize this webinar talk delivered by Professor Dr. Martin Mulder, an emeritus professor and head Department of Education and Competence Studies, Wageningen University, the Netherlands, on professional competence of rural development advisors. This is the 5th webinar organized in the Society of Extension Professionals webinar series. I take this opportunity to welcome our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sir, PJTSAU, Dr. V. Praveen Rao Garu, Director of Extension, PJTSAU, Dr. V. Sudharani Madam. And also I warmly welcome former Joint Director and Head of the Extension Division, IARI, Dr. Vijay Raghavan, Sir, and the galaxy of scientists from ICR. I also welcome Dr. Sanjay Kalekar, Sir, Joint Director Training, and Dr. Armorikar, Sir, Director Training. And I also extend my warm welcome to Dr. K. Ponnuswamy, Sir, Head Division of Extension, NDRA Colonel, and all faculty of NDRA and students and other dignitaries who are likely to join in due course of this webinar. I extend a warm welcome to today's esteemed speaker, Dr. Martin, Sir, for kindly honoring our invitation to address in today's webinar. I also welcome all Society of Extension Professional member scientists who are working and stalwarts, those who retired from agriculture, horticulture, and veterinary universities, state departments, and extension professionals working in private and NGO sectors. I also invite University Head of Extension, Dr. I.S. Rao, Sir, and all EI faculty and students of MSc and PhD with a request for active participation and interaction. Now, I request our Director, EEI, Dr. M. Jaganmohan Reddy Garu, to say a few words about the SEP.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Vasanta. Good afternoon to all. Sir, Dr. Martin Mulder, sir.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, good afternoon to all, especially the members of the Society of Extension Professionals, for this today's afternoon's guest lecture, invited talk by Emeritus Professor Dr. Martin Mulder. I take this opportunity welcoming our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. V. Praveen Rao Garu, respected Director of Extension of our University, Sudharani Ma'am, and all the members, officials, students who are attending this webinar. So as a General Secretary of this Society of Extension Professionals, I would like to give a brief sketch of activities what we are doing for the benefit of the extension professionals pan-India. This Society of Extension Professionals was founded on 12th July 2012 with a registration number of 1630 with a mission to advance the cause of extension education and facilitate closer association amongst members and other extension personnel working in all Indian states and abroad. As a part of the regular activities of SEP, it was proposed to organize a series of webinars for the benefit of members. First webinar on emerging approaches and trends in extension research, a social change perspective, was conducted on 28 January 2022, which was delivered by Dr. P. Sethuraman, Principal Scientist, CTCRI, Kerala. Second webinar was organized on 28th February, in which Dr. P. Chandrasekhara, Honorable Director General, Managed, has shared his experiences on practicing extension. The third webinar was conducted on 29th March of this year, which was delivered by Sri Vilas Vishnu Shinde, CEO and Managing Director, Sahyadri Farmers Producers Company Limited, Maharashtra, on the topic of success saga of Sahyadri FPO, challenges faced and strategies adopted for sustenance. The fourth webinar in this series was delivered by Dr. S. Venkureddy, President and Executive Director, PRDIS Hyderabad, former Professor, Angro and Head EI Consultant, World Bank and FAO, on the topic of 60 years of my journey with agricultural extension, sharing of experiences, insights and points for future on 29th April of this year. The Society of Extension Professionals is planning many other activities to enrich the knowledge of its members on agricultural extension methodologies, to conduct research on many issues plaguing agriculture, and employs different tools and techniques to reach the farmers and impressive on them for the adoption of modern crop production technologies. At present, the total membership in the society is around 150. So the present committee consists of President Dr. V. Sudharani, the President Director of Extension of our university, Vice President Satish Kumar, Principal Scientist, Indian Institute of Oil Seeds Research, General Secretary myself, Treasurer Dr. I. Srinivasa Rao of this institute, Joint Secretary Dr. K. Madhubabu, Professor and Head of the Department of Agriculture Extension of the College of Rajendra Nagar of this university. So this is a brief overview about Society of Extension Professionals. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity.
Now, at the outset, I request our beloved Director of Extension, PJTSAU, and President SEP, Dr. V. Sudharani Madam, to give her introductory remarks in this webinar. Madam, you are not audible, ma'am.
Madam, please unmute. Yeah.
Very good afternoon, respected Emeritus Professor Dr. Martin Mulder, today's webinar speaker, and our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sir, Dr. Praveen Rao Garu, and my colleagues from EI, Department of Agriculture Extension, and other extension centers, and all the SCP members across the country. Really, it is a very good opportunity for all our extension professionals of SEP to have such a very good what you call interaction regarding the most and critical and pivotal aspect of rural agro advisory services, more so specific with regard to agro advisory services. Mulder sir, this is one area where all the countries and the different extension systems that are functioning across the globe, everywhere, this has become very critical nowadays, because what happens is ultimately the farming community or the rural community need to be uplifted. Their standard of living and well-being is a very ultimately the required outcome of any extension activity. And especially if I have gone through the various studies with regard to competencies that you have made, and so many studies that I could able to see from your abstract, really it is very, very interesting to know. Why? Because this word competency is being used vaguely in most of the organizations, and more so specifically when it comes to the question of agro advisory services at the grassroots level. Basically, at the top level, to have the competencies, at the middle level, we have professional graduations and the requirements fulfilled. But when it comes to the question at the grassroots level, various players and stakeholders in agricultural extension system that we have, the different players have a different background, and everybody is working for the farming community with a service orientation. and some may be with profit orientation. So all these dynamics makes the extension advisory more fluid and more influenced. Any little change that happens with one player automatically it disturbs the entire extension system. So the need for competencies is quite visibly felt, and some of the studies that are being conducted in India and developing countries with regard to the competencies of agro advisory services, they all have literally suggested a few points that are needed. Why I'm mentioning these things is definitely a focus on these things could be made by you, Mulder sir. One is agro advisory services need not just get restricted to the technical advice or advice with regard to the technology that they are transferring. It should be a holistic agricultural advisory service. That means the entire farm family, the entire community need to be considered, the entire ecosystem. So this holistic agro advisory services to be provided, what competencies are needed for those who work at the village level for providing these services. So this becomes very, very essential. So we need to go beyond the technology and think. And another important one we have in India, especially, the input dealers are playing a very greater role. So keeping that in view, our National Institute Manage has come up with one competency building program for input dealers, that is DESI program, wherein their capacities were built. But however, the input dealers more so through studies, it was found that they are mostly involved in product advisory rather than the technical advisory. So this is again one area where that service orientation, thinking beyond the product, thinking beyond the technology need to be addressed. And another important aspect is the standards or any certification that is needed for anyone who would like to serve at the village level for advisory services, maybe the rural advisory services. So what sort of competencies are expected, what sort of standards are required, and how that certification could be done, definitely we would like to listen from you, sir. So this is very, very essential. And another one is most of the studies, they came up with one finding that the performance linked incentives to the grassroots level extension services. Maybe the performance could be increase in that particular village or mandal, the increase in the productivity, increase in the area of that particular crop, or maybe the coverage of the area and production levels. So if that happens, automatically they need to have increase in the some incentive to the services provided. And maybe reducing the gap between the productivity that is obtained in the research farm and in the farmer's field. If the gap is reduced, definitely the extension services need to be incentivized. And one more thing is, overall, if we see now, we are talking about doubling of the farmers' income, and our Prime Minister is very much focusing on this. So if we want to think on these lines, in the particular area, what is the net income generated per unit area? So this also we would like to know. Based on that also, incentives could be given to the agro advisory services. And as you rightly going to enlighten us on rural agro advisory services, what I request, sir, is keeping all these things in view, how best we can come up and how best we can think of this certification at the grassroots level, which could be taken up on a large scale. And one independent body is definitely needed for maintaining the quality of extension services at the grassroots level. So these are all the few things I would like to listen from you, sir, because we are very much what you call with all enthusiasm and keen interest, we are waiting to listen to you, sir. Let me not take much time. So I welcome you once again, sir, for this particular session. Thank you for giving this opportunity. I also just request all the participant SCP professionals to take the advantage of Mulder sir's expertise and take it forward in carrying out the extension services at the grassroots level. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. So for all the queries you have raised and for all the clarifications, I'm sure we'll get the answers and we all will get benefit out of that, ma'am. Now I request our colleague, Dr. V. Ravindra Nayak, sir, who is an associate professor working in the Department of Agricultural Extension Education, College of Agriculture, Rajendra Nagar, Hyderabad, to say a few introductory words and introduce the resource person, that is Dr. Martin, sir.
Thank you, madam. A warm and pleasant good afternoon to all. Most respected Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. V. Praveen Rao, sir, the Director of Extension and President, Society of Extension Professionals, Dr. Sudharani, madam, the General Secretary, Dr. M. Jagan Mohan Reddy, sir, all the dignitaries, heads of the departments, faculty from across different parts of the India, and galaxy of extension professionals. We have retired stalwarts like Dr. Vijayaraghavan, sir, and all the research scholars from across different parts of the India. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our guest speaker today, Emeritus Professor Dr. Martin Mulder, who is going to talk us about the professional competence of rural development advisors. This is a subject in which we should all be deeply interested, since professional competence is an essential condition for effective performance. Dr. Martin Mulder is a former professor and head of the Department of Education and Competence Studies, enjoyed a fulfilling career as an academician and a prolific writer. He is the past editor-in-chief of the renowned Journal of Agricultural Education and Extension, published widely with his colleagues in the field of competence studies, education, learning, and edited reference publications like the volume Competence-Based Vocational and Professional Education and the Handbook of Vocational Education and Training. Dr. Mulder presented his research in India before in New Delhi and Varanasi. He is currently chair of the academic board of NCOI Universities of Applied Sciences and owner director of his consultancy company, Consultancy for Education and Training. Sir, the Society of Extension Professionals, Hyderabad, is extremely and profusely delighted to have your gracious presence on this occasion, and I, with all due respect, request the guest speaker of today, Professor Martin Mulder, sir, on behalf of the Society of Extension Professionals, welcome and request to deliver the lecture on professional competence of rural development advisors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir,
Yes,
you are
sir.
audible.
All right,
Go
thank you
ahead.
very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Ravindra Nayak, for the introduction of myself and all the other speakers before me. Thank you very much for the introductory remarks. Thank you also for the themes that have been elaborated and the questions behind them that stress the importance of competence at the level of villages and grassroots level. I will come to that this afternoon. Distinguished guests and participants in this webinar, good afternoon from the Netherlands. Good to be back indeed, although in a virtual way, to your beautiful country, India. I'm delighted to give a presentation at your conference today and would like to thank the Society of Extension Professionals for inviting me to speak today. I'm very sorry I cannot be with you in Hyderabad. I have very good memories of my visits Ravinder was talking about in Delhi, Benares, but also Kochi, Mumbai, and other places in India. I've not been in Hyderabad actually, but I saw some pictures and I thought, oh, it looks like a lovely place. But nevertheless, I'm very excited to have a speaking opportunity at this hybrid event. And I am applauding your initiative to strengthen the Society of Extension Professionals. As former editor-in-chief of the Journal of Agriculture, Education, and Extension, published by Taylor and Francis, that one, and as professor of emeritus of Wageningen University, I'm a strong believer of the value of rural development advising and competence development of farmers at all levels to improve their livelihoods and to contribute to the sustainable production of healthy food and livelihoods. I will explain that during my talk, which will last, I think, about 50 minutes. But let me first say something more about my background. Indeed, I've been a professor of education and competence studies, and I did extensive research on competence development, also of farmers in different parts of the world, in Europe, Asia, and Africa. I was privileged to present my work in various parts of the world, like you see are the red dots in this world map. During my academic career, I've been publishing a lot. Dr. Naik said already things about that. And much of that serves as a background of my talk today. I've also been contributing to the Journal of Agriculture, Education and Extension, the JAEE, a lot actually, also on the theme of today. When I browsed through my publications in the JAEE, I also found back my article on education, extension education theory and research in India of 2016. I forgot about it already a little bit, but I was happy to see it back. So you can read a lot in my contributions to the field. And I know that some of you have also published in the JAE and other journals, and thank you for doing that. As a publishing author and editor, I have gained a lot of experience with publishing in scholarly journals and the assessment of manuscripts. And when preparing for this talk, Dr. Naik, Dr. Reddy, and Dr. Babu asked me to speak a bit about this topic, publishing, for the students and the researchers in this group. But in fact, it is a topic in itself. Some years back, I did a full professional development session at a conference of the Association of International Agricultural Extension Education. And this topic of the session was just this: how to publish in leading academic journals. I will share two things about this, my key lessons and attention points. The key lessons are always to select the target journal first and then start writing. Many do it in a different way, reverse way, and end up in problems. Choose a follow-up on an issue discussed in the target journal. At least link it to the things published in the target journal. I advise to focus on a core message for a specific audience and connect text fragments based on a strong red thread. There should be a clear story in the manuscript. Be sure every article has a punchline, a reason to read it, a unique select point, one line with a key conclusion. It is always possible to try to liaise with editors and authors to get their advice. And I also advise beginning researchers, don't be overambitious. Climb up the ladder in terms of quality of the journals you want to publish in. The attention points I would like to mention are: formulate a concise problem statement. Make a thorough review of the related current research. make sure of including a current conceptual framework and a clear one, select and use a clear research method or methods, and also use adequate and, if possible, elaborate data analysis techniques. Always present the main results first and present the conclusions by answering the research questions. Don't forget to do that. Add the theoretical and practical lessons from the research. And be sure to add an impeccable and up-to-date reference list. And you don't want to know how many problems that raises. And finally, I also suggest, it's not on the slide, but to add an excellent summary. The summary is, and the abstract is often a neglected piece, but reviewers always look very, very much into the summaries and then already get an impression of the quality of a study. For the rest of the topic, I kindly refer you to my website, mmulder.nl, and the presentation of this professional development session should be still there with the rest of all my work, all free, accessible. Now to the theme of today. During my professional and academic career, I concentrated a lot on competence development. However, the extension education and learning field is much broader than that. And in this slide, you see an overview of theories, which I think are all relevant for learning, also for rural advisory professionals, but also for farmers, also at the grassroots level. And competence theory is just actually one of them. I know many extension professionals are not informed about these theories based on which they can found their extension practices. Many of them are predominantly, I know, from Wageningen, experts in the field, in a subject like soil sciences, plant sciences, animal sciences, or whatever. Scholars in the learning and development sciences who provide all these theories don't make it easy for them, because there is very often too much specialization and too much fragmentation. There's very little overarching thinking about all these theories, but they're still important. And instead of describing all these competence theories, which will take hours, let me say what I mean by competence. In my opinion, which is based on all my explorations in the field, competence is performance requirement. Professional competence is conditional for effective professional performance. Competence of farmers is essential and conditional for further innovation and productivity improvement. And I see competencies as integrated capabilities, as clusters of knowledge, skills, and attitudes.
Sir, now this is not audible, sir.
This is not audible. I'm still here, but you can't hear me?
What about other audience? Is it audible?
Yeah, yes, it is audible.
Audible,
It's
audible. It's audible, madam. It is audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Audible.
Naveen,
Okay.
please check at your end.
Yes, then my end is not a problem, apparently. So
Yeah, madam. Now it is audible, ma'am. Now it is coming out.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay, Naveen, right.
okay. Then I see competencies integrated capabilities, not only of knowledge, but also skills, and not only skills, also the attitudes by which people are working or performing tasks. They are needed in a certain profession, occupation, a role, etc., etc. And as said, conditional for also sustainable, effective performance. And they include also higher levels of things like self-regulation, critical thinking, problem solving, realizing innovation, and creating transformation. And I will give many examples of these in my talk. An important question about competencies is which competencies need to be developed in the agro-food complex, the farms, in all enterprises and institutes, villages and what have you, which play a part in delivering food security and safety. I used to differentiate 3 types of competencies, but now I arrived at 5. These competencies for specific activities, everything is known. known jobs of people like extension people or rural development advisors, dynamic roles within all these jobs, but also, that is more advanced, the industry 4, the Internet of Things and Homo robotics. But you see that in large organizations coming through, and also for the unknown future. How to develop competence to improve performance of all who are involved and to prepare them for the unknown future, that is a key question. In my farewell speech from Wageningen University a couple of years ago, I concentrated myself on just that question. And I came to 5 components of future-oriented competence domains, which are presented in this slide. I do not have the time to explain all these competence domains and the underlying competencies which were selected, but integrative learning competence lies at the heart of this model. The other competencies are defined on the horizontal dimension of personal, professional, and social professional competence, and on the vertical dimension of self-management and career competence and disciplinary and interdisciplinary competence. And in my opinion, all these are essential for professional and rural development advisors. Future-oriented competence is often related, as you may know, to resilience in a VUCA world. I assume you are familiar with this. VUCA then stands for the middle part of this slide, volatile, uncertain, a complex and ambiguous world. And that is what the world is today, but it is more. At the other side, there's also characteristics of the present time, more on the bright side, where we can call as variable, unique, creative, and awesome, the happy side. But also, we have to acknowledge that there is the brutal side of the world, the violent, the unjust, the corrupt, and the abusive. Unfortunately, there's way too much of this negativism, and a challenge for extension professionals is to help people who are facing all these difficulties in these times, in their context. Competence theory has been developing since the 1950s already, and here you see a list of the major theories since that period. It started within the field of psychology as an alternative drive theory, a theory that explains the motivation of people to learn and perform tasks, such as a child that wants to learn to walk and to speak. It then moved to performance theory, organizational theory, and educational theory, and it also entered the field of extension and rural development. Several authors have presented competence frameworks for extension professionals like you in India, and I will go into that in a minute. All competence theories taken together, I see historical development from fundamental behaviorism that was visible in the 1960s, mainly 70s, integrated occupationalism, which became more popular in the later stage, and during the last decades, situated professionalism. This third category of competence theories concentrates on the contextual meaning of competence, authenticity of learning, situated cognition, and professional learning communities like farmer communities, regional communities, local communities, in which knowledge is co-constructed, constructed together. And this is an approach which is most important for farmers and all those who are contributing to the production and sales of secure and safe food. However, in most practices, in most cases, a combination of the three is needed. So now that you know my perspective, how I see competence and competence theories out there, I will now go into the global challenges and transformations in the agro-food complex. The theme that I am addressing today can be placed against the background of global challenges like climate change, land degradation, and what have you over there, water supplies, resource depletion in general, gene patenting, commodification of agricultural assets, buying land, pollution, poverty, pandemics, energy costs, etc., etc. Within these global challenges, agri-food knowledge systems exist, which consist of the various universities, research institutes, colleges, training centers, extension organizations, private consultancies, manufacturers and NGOs, etc. And within the wider agri-food complex, there are many people working like unskilled laborers, service workers, skilled workers, craft, trade workers, plant and machine operators, technicians, all kinds of subject matter professionals, legislators, entrepreneurs, etc., etc. Now, my point is that within these backgrounds, all these institutions try to help all these human resources to perform better, to make them ready for new tasks, to develop them. And that is also the challenge of, I would say, rural development advisory organizations, and therefore they, I think, need to apply a holistic competence framework geared towards their various client organizations or clients. And that, as you see, is a very complex set of organizations and people. Now, all global challenges play out differently in different countries, states, and regions. See the transformation of agriculture in the Netherlands. I will say just a bit of that. Agriculture in the Netherlands was seen by the National Geographic as a kind of a miracle. Being a very tiny country, with only 17 million people, its agriculture innovation and production is phenomenal. This is one of their pictures of the landscape in the Netherlands, the traditional polder picture with ample water supply and green pastries. But there's also this picture from the same source of the Westland near Rotterdam and The Hague. It is called the Glass City. It is a vast area of greenhouses for agricultural production. But within the country, there's a lot of transformation going on. In the region where I live, many farms have been discontinued for several reasons. In many cases, farmers' incomes were too low according to the national standards. They had no successors, so many started sideline activities, which in many cases resulted in new main income generation enterprises. For instance, in the region where I lived, traditionally an agricultural region with crop farming, livestock farming, horticulture and dairy farming. While this is still going on, there are now farms which have been a shop. They are now a shop for regional products. There are stables for horse care for leisure, barns which are refurbished as children nurseries, to care farms to host persons with social and mental challenges, farms which are rebuilt as guest accommodations, garden centers, mobile home storages, art centers, and extensive luxury homes for countryside living. Nowadays, many stakeholders are claiming the use of land. Also in the Netherlands, in the region where I live, and what can be seen is an interwoven complex of chains and networks. It has been mentioned already before during the introductions that primary producers, input organizations, trade organizations like markets and large buyers, logistic organizations and transportations, processing farms which make processed food and drinks, manufacturing companies which make all kinds of machinery which is being used in farming, manufacturing itself and logistics, sales organizations like retail chains, financing organizations for banking and insurances, governing organizations at various levels, all kinds of NGOs, research organizations and institutes for education extension. So there's a lot, and that is being changed towards sustainability, and that needs systems, structural systems change, innovation and transformation that is going on. Because the major issue at stake in agriculture at the moment is the issue of sustainability, which in animal husbandry currently focuses on nitrogen emission reduction. This graph shows the emissions reductions which have been realized already since the 1990s. But further reduction is necessary according to the environmental policy in place. I spoke already about the huge productivity in agriculture in the Netherlands, but given the small human population, the numbers of animal populations are indeed staggering. The total numbers in 2020 for chicken is 92 million, pigs 12 million, dairy 4 million, sheep just under 1 million, and goats around 600,000, and there are about 450 horses, which are largely kept as pets for children, equine sports for adults, and breeding as a business. And to reduce the number of livestock, the Ministry of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality aggressively promotes a buyout scheme for farmers. For dairy, pigs and poultry sector, there is much resistance against this policy direction in the farming community, as you can imagine, but still is going on. And not only have there been many developments in agriculture and food production, there have also been profound changes in the agri-food knowledge system. And I will make a couple of remarks about the transformation of this system. Until the 1980s, the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries was responsible for the whole research, development and dissemination strategy in agriculture. Research was conducted in dedicated institutes and centers of the ministry, and in the Agricultural University of Wageningen, development and innovation was supported by the ministry, and dissemination of new knowledge was done within the University of Wageningen, agricultural schools and colleges, practical training centers, and agricultural extension. However, because many problems with arose regarding pollution, animal welfare, food quality, various political parties together with forces in the European Union, the responsibilities of the Ministry of Agriculture were changed from caring for to making sure that. The neoliberal policy which was in place resulted in privatization and marketization to various tasks of the ministry. The research institutes were made independent and had to apply for funds from the ministry and do research for large farms and companies. The responsibility for agriculture education was moved to the Ministry of Agriculture, from the Ministry of Agriculture to the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality now is concentrating on policy issues, mainly agriculture extension was mainly, yes, and agriculture extension is what I want to say is privatized, fully privatized. There's no state-financed agriculture extension anymore. So not much left is of that, as farming nowadays is knowledge intensive, for which in most cases senior secondary agriculture education and higher education is required. And at present, questions of farmers are quite high level and specific. High level farmers are now sufficiently able to develop their own knowledge, and they don't need extension professionals anymore. In India, as you well know, there also have been many developments in agriculture and agriculture extension. I saw very impressive reports of the last decade, which were reporting on the state of agricultural and agricultural policy making during the coming years. A report of Glenn Denning and colleagues from 2010 of IFPRI presented a review of agriculture extension in India and asked the question whether information needs of farmers weren't being met. And I was struck by two conclusions in the report. The first is about information for marginalized poor farmers. It was concluded that there had been a wide range of reform initiatives in agriculture extension in India the past decades, which are depicted in this slide, but that the coverage of and the access to and the quality of the information provided to marginalized and poor farmers is uneven. And the second is about the increasing need to work in partnerships, to share knowledge and skills, to share them really, and to provide locally relevant services that meet the information needs of marginal and smallholder farmers in India. Questions that have been asked up front at the beginning also of the seminar. In their 2013 article, Gupta and Shinde also reviewed agricultural extension in India. Their conclusions were also quite devastating for the extension sector. They said that the extension sector is pluralistic, which is fine, given the diversity within the agri-food cluster in India, but the authors stated that the extension sector was not performing well. They pointed at the many challenges within the sector, which are understaffing, the inflexible organization, incompetence of staff, a traditional dissemination approach, disconnection from research, and limited access to farmers. And probably we can also mention there and add underfinancing. They also pointed at the conflicting paradigms between on-farm assistance versus addressing whole value chains. And that is a completely different story. Most of the extension was aimed at the individual needs of farmers, whereas in many cases, problems of farmers relate to many problems in the value chain. The authors also found many problems regarding demand of and access to the information of farmers. And they suggested at that time to focus more on productivity improvement, profitability, and income generation. In a more recent publication, also from India in 2019, of Nandi and Swaminukanu, they gave an overview of the agriculture extension system in India. They called their overview a meta-analysis, which I believe is not actually, but nevertheless, it is an interesting paper, and it showed that the investment in agriculture, research, and education in India was around 0.7% of the gross domestic product, whereas the advice of the World Bank is to invest 2% in it. They also saw variations by state, which is obvious, I think, given the different economic structures of the states, and I've seen that around the country. The authors noted a low political priority and support for extension, which I have seen in many other countries too. They also reported that the number of extension workers was too low, the extension functionaries predominantly had inadequate competence, and the lack of farmer participation in extension planning and implementation. I don't know if the situation has improved a lot since then, but what I do know is that if services providers do not add sufficient value for their clients, they will be out of business soon, regardless of who is paying, the nation, the state, the sector, or the farmer. And reversely, if service providers do add significant value, they will be thriving. Now, I will proceed with the core of my presentation, the competence needs of extension professionals. What are these competencies? Which domains ask for special attention? And how can these competencies at all levels be developed? First of all, I will present a study which developed a competence profile for extension professionals in 2007. This study was conducted by a PhD student of mine, Mostafa Karbasyun, and the goal of this study was to develop a competence profile for instructors in the agriculture extension service. Regarding the methodology, He used the model of human resource development profession as was developed in 1982 already by Patricia McLagan. And the key components of this methodology were to identify future forces, observe ethical issues, define desired outputs of the professionals, standards of performance, and their competencies. The main results of this study was that a common competence profile was possible, but that this should be differentiated across populations, like gender, also gender and age, level of education and motives of course, and in general, extension participation. 3 groups of data sources were used to synthesize the competence profile for extension professionals: studies of farmers, studies of agriculture experts, and studies in the field of HRD and competence development. 3 groups of competencies were distinguished then, and they were elaborated: general competencies, course-related competencies, and technical competencies. And the competencies were defined and explained further, in much more detail, of course, than in this presentation. In this slide, you only see the abbreviations of the competence statements in the dissertation. Most rural advisory experts focus on their technical competencies, their subject matter understanding and farmers' business understanding, which is good, of course, but not sufficient, as has been mentioned also in the beginning. General competencies and course or extension related competencies are equally important, although this is often perceived as being less important. But think of intellectual versatility or creativity to analyze problems and find new ways of improvement, relationship building, communication skills. Nobody will argue that these competencies are not important, or presentation skills, knowledge about how farmers are learning, feedback skills, and skills of managing crops. These are also regarded as being essential. So the total professional competence of rural development advisors was seen as a mix of these various competencies. In the course of the 1990s and 2000s, within extension, participative approaches were promoted, followed by innovation, co-construction, and knowledge brokering. Following these developments, we did a study on co-innovation, which was largely conducted in larger organizations, and I will present this study in the next 2 slides. The study was completed by Elise du Châtaignier in 2009, also a PhD student of mine, and more specifically, it was on open innovation competence. This is relevant for the field of agricultural consulting because extension organizations together, or extensions organizations and other organizations, can engage in joint ventures to create new services or new approaches. An open innovation team is then a group of persons of different organizations who cooperate for the benefit of both parties, for which they can use the know-how of both organizations. A standard example is the production of the Senseo coffee machine of Philips and the production of coffee pads for that machine by Sara Lee, which is a different company. And this was especially hot in that time of the dissertation. Obviously, mutual trust is important in open innovation. In many cases, farmers can also engage in open innovation or co-production. What competencies do people need for this? That was the main question of the piece of this research. The results of this study were an overview of activities that need to be performed in open innovation, the competence elements needed to perform these activities, an optimal clustering of the competencies and competence elements in a competence profile, insight in context variation of the resulting competence profile, and evidence for the link between open innovation competence and team performance, so a link between competence and performance. So the more competent these professionals were in open innovation, the better their team performance. The next slide shows the headings of the competence domains which were essential for this type of innovation. The open innovation competencies were divided in 3 broad fields: interpersonal management, project management, and content management. As an example, in the field of interpersonal management, and then specified for farmers, involving would mean how to create interests in other farmers to make sure that a collective innovation will be created. Influencing would mean how to guarantee that one's interests is supported. Handling conflicts could mean how to cope with differences of opinion, which are always there, in a way that is constructive for all parties. I cannot go into all these competencies, but together you will appreciate the importance of creating a learning climate, action orientation, the mood for winning, monitoring progress, and mindful decision making. And further, clear communication, sound analysis of situations and data, exploring new ideas and approaches, combining interests, strengths, and expertise, and the power of responsible competition. I cannot elaborate on all these competencies, but you will find all these details in the dissertation, which is freely accessible on the internet. What has become a major trend in agricultural development research is the attention for entrepreneurship. One would say that farmers are entrepreneurs by nature, that entrepreneurship is in their genes, but quite often, via intergenerational learning, difficult word, new farmers copied the practices of their ancestors. And once started, they tried to consolidate what is their property. However, entrepreneurship is needed to be able to cope with the many developments in the world that affect the local community. So we did another study on the theme of entrepreneurship, which I will also present briefly. The study on entrepreneurship competence was done by Thomas Lans, also a former PhD student of mine. And in this study, innovation competencies were assessed by greenhouse farmers, their employees, and external consultants, which resulted in interesting differences. Next, the question was, what learning activities entrepreneurs performed? And as an important result, we found that top competence strengths were having a learning orientation and be good in self-management. Next to that, many learning activities were found. This slide shows the 3 highest and lowest competencies that 10 farmers who we closely studied possessed. And it looks like these farmers were good in having a learning orientation, had a strong level of self-management, planning, and they had a market orientation and result orientation. And keep in mind, these are all successful farmers with innovative approaches. But you could say this, but this is not quite the case. It holds only for 5 of the 10 farmers, so not for the others. So the interpretation of these data can also be reversed. The top competencies are mastered by only half or less of the farmers. And the bottom of the list is even more worrying, as competence in the field of international orientation, their human resource management in their companies, their farms, and development, but also strategic orientation and teamwork ranked very low. So as a conclusion here, the farmers we studied needed a lot of competence development, in this case, in the field of innovation. Another emerging competence domain is corporate social responsibility or responsible agriculture and food production. Ego Osaki studied that domain, also a former PhD student. I will tell a bit about this study too. This study, completed in 2016, addressed various questions which were about the relationship between the learning organization and corporate social responsibility. the individual competencies that support CSR, the managerial roles which are relevant for supporting CSR, the competency CSR managers need for effective performance, and learning activities that enable competence development of CSR professionals. Osagi distinguished 4 competence domains on CSR: the cognition-oriented competence domain, the functional-oriented, the social-oriented, and the meta-oriented domain. In her dissertation, she has elaborated all competencies and gave examples of CSR practices. Time does not permit me to further elaborate on these competencies, but once again, you can read these later online, as you also have free access to this dissertation. Ladies and gentlemen, in the previous part of my presentation, I gave my views on the transformation of agriculture and food production, the importance of competence development and rural development of professionals, of farmers, and all other actors in the agri-food complex. And I elaborated on the competence frameworks of farmers, the emerging fields of open innovation, entrepreneurship, and corporate social responsibility, which also is related, of course, to corporate to social responsibility at all levels, also the grassroots level. Let me now turn to the current competence needs, the current needs of rural advisory services professionals and farmers. This is from the dissertation of Chalachud Taragegne, who will defend his doctoral dissertation next month. He has done a competence study amongst farmers and district rural development advisors. He also distinguished the competencies of district officers in the 4 domains that I just presented, the cognitive, functional, social, and meta-competence domains. I cannot elaborate much on this now, but in my opinion, it is worth looking at. For those who are interested in further information, also this study will be online, I guess at the end of June when the dissertation has been done. What I call a breaking finding, or a couple of breaking findings of this study, is that smallholders who received training in authentic work situations generally achieved better performance than those who received training in the farmer training centers. And this is, I think, something to seriously think about. The next finding needs some clarification, I think. We created 2 groups of farmers and trained them with the independent variable as competence approach. That means that in one group, we inserted principles of competence-based training, and in the other group, not. I will come back to those principles in a bit. We call these groups the high and low competence-based training groups. The dependent variable was yield per hectare, so that is what we expected. And we, of course, expected that the CBT training group, the high-level one, was resulting in higher yield per hectare. The baseline for both groups was 22 quintals per hectare. So that was their average performance. And the quintal is 100 kilograms. What we found was that smallholders who participated in the low CBT training situation showed lower performance than those who participated in the high CBT group. Okay, I didn't know that was a bit disturbance at the background, but maybe you didn't hear that, but I did. Well, anyway, I will move on. The low CBT group produced 31 quintals per hectare, and the high CBT group produced 41 quintals per hectare. That I thought was a stunning result. So we conclude that generally training helps, but that high CBT training gains significantly in terms of yield per hectare compared to a low CBT group. And this is something important to keep in mind. It supports the idea of investing in competence-based rural development services. So now I have been looking at these competencies, but the next question becomes, what has to be done to develop these competencies in practice, and with that, improve performance of the farmers and rural development professionals together? In my next slides, I will go into this important question. For instance, Thomas Lans again did a study on how entrepreneurs in the agri-food sector, including farmers, were learning. He distinguished three categories of learning activities: the formal, the non-formal, informal activities. A distinction you probably know from the literature and practice. In the category of formal learning, he found courses, education, training on the job, and e-learning. And in the category non-formal learning, he found business visits, farm visits, conferences, gatherings, farm groups, study groups of farmers, extension activities, and contacts with research and development centers. In the category informal learning, he found that entrepreneurs were reading professional journals, consulted or cooperated with colleagues, listened and watched the radio television programs, are now, of course, the internet also, meeting with suppliers, speaking with customers and producers, consulting their bookkeepers, playing management games, and they engaged in on-the-job learning, spoke with their banks, conducted self-analysis and reflection. They used a role model. They relied on the pre-knowledge of themselves, which they had been developing already, and they used knowledge databases, and at that time CD-ROMs, which would now, of course, be smartphones, podcasts, YouTube videos, and what have you. What was striking is that the informal and non-formal ways of learning were used much more often than the formal, and that also related to the performance of their work. This finding entails an important lesson as well for rural development advisory organizations providing extension services. In the study, the more recent study of Osagi of 2018, the same was found. You see this in the slide, that learning activities of corporate social responsibility managers were conducting. You see 4 categories of learning and their main frequencies, the mean frequencies and standard deviations based on a 5-point Likert scale. You can see that learning through social interaction ranks highest. This is learning by having discussions, collaboration, asking questions and advice, getting feedback, and training others. The next category and its importance is learning through critical reflection, that is reflection on experiences and information checking. The third category is learning through experience, which means looking for and finding information, observing and copying work of others, experimenting and performance tasks within their own roles, but also outside of their own roles. And the final category is learning through theory, which stands for participation in formal courses in education. And these results also send a message to extension organizations and professionals as to how to realize competence development and theory, and thereby performance improvement. The more informal activities are being used most. So the informal is the most important thing to keep in mind. Another study from Lans showed the same results. That was a study with 10 farmers, which we studied very much in depth. The findings are from the Entrepreneurship Competence study I just presented. In this slide, the learning activities of the entrepreneurs used in their innovation processes are shown, and these are all informal learning activities, informal, except for the last, which is training. Reflection, observation, experimentation, and performing occupational tasks account for more than 50% of the, what they think, successful activities for learning, for innovation. And also this has, in my opinion, important consequences for rural development advisory services. Now, that I've shown the different learning activities by which competence can be developed, the next and probably the most important question becomes, what levels of learning take place on the way to performance improvement of farmers? These levels of learning can be presented as a triangle with 4 levels of learning in farming. It's only recently that I developed this triangle, but I think it is the most important slide in my whole presentation. The first level is the work advice given by the advisor, which includes getting an assignment, for instance, on post-harvest management, then getting feed up, doing the assignment or the task and get a judgmental reaction like, well done, or that is not completely correct, that's wrong, or you can do it better, without further explanation. That happens a lot. Judging here is seen as quite basic, but it can also be as an elaborate process. The second level in this triangle is about that further explanation, for instance, about the principles of post-harvest management, the constructive feedback given by the extension worker or rural development advisor. That includes constructive and useful feed forward, how to go further, how to proceed, and the reflection of the feedback. The reflection of, in this case, the farmer, him or herself. And the third level is then that the advisor and the farmer engage in a professional dialogue. The advisor invites the reactions of the farmer based on his or her reflection on the feedback. The farmer explains his or her vision, formulates conclusions and consequences, and the advisor critically evaluates that. He or she has a real dialogue with the farmer, male or female. And at level 4, the highest level, the farmer may have gone through different stages of conducting farming activities, getting feedback, and professional dialogues with the advisors. Can also be professional dialogues, of course, with others. And based on that, they grow to the level of continuous self-assessment. How do I do things? How can I do them better? Learning and development. What information can I get? Where can I get it from? How do I learn in practice? And then farm performance improvement. And at the left side of the model, you see the dimension low to high level of learning, which is linked to low and high levels of return on investment of learning for the farm. It seems obvious that well-structured learning, assessment, and professional dialogue all lead to higher quality of learning and more value added for the farming activity. Or higher levels of learning result in higher levels of farm performance. Ladies and gentlemen, before I am finalizing with my conclusions, I would like to share fields of application which I see for the improvement of professional competence of rural development advisors. I see 4 fields of application for the competence approach of rural development advisory practice. The first is refocusing extension education based on core competencies, frameworks of core competencies. So that is the first. The second is aligning extension practices, also the extension practices to competence frameworks for that. And the third is implementing competence management in extension organizations. because if the competence management in the extension organizations is established well, it is a good example to follow lower in the organization and in the direction of the farming support activities. And then as last, define competence frameworks for all students in education that are being prepared to deliver extension services, rural development advisors at the BSc, MSc, and PhD study level. And I've seen there are already competence frameworks for these levels of studies. Just a matter of finding them and then trying to apply them. Given the time, I will not further elaborate on that. But at the end of my PowerPoint, I can make maybe some more remarks about it. I've got slides enough about this, but at the moment, I should be concise and not elaborate further on this, I think. Then let me come to my conclusions. First of all, we have found that competence is related with performance, which is a very important finding, and strongly supports initiatives in the direction of competence-based rural development consulting or extension. Professionals, including farmers, have competence profiles. That is what farmers in our studies have discovered. Hey, there are competence profiles, people have them. Okay, I also have a competence profile. Okay, if it explained well, do you understand that? And that different people have different perceptions of that as well. But there are also striking similarities, and you'll see that in multi-rater assessments of competence. What we have done with farmers by having them rated by their co-workers, consultants, clients, etc. The third conclusion is competence can be developed and thereby performance improved. That's also what our farmers in our studies have discovered. Okay, I have a competence profile. What is it? Okay, but I can develop that myself, and then I can improve my performance if I do that well. And then show to them how this works. Farmers, but also extension professionals, will be more motivated to develop themselves. Number 4 is, however, we need to be aware of the fact that competence development is a complex process and that implementing competence-based development approaches requires sufficient expertise, time, and funding. So that is absolutely necessary. In all cases, current and future-oriented competence frameworks are needed. There are too many frameworks that look back in time, or just what is now needed, but what's now needed should be formulated into the perspective of the future developments. These frameworks can be used for competence management, competence assessment, and competence development. And finally, and not least important, a current and holistic view on competence is needed, as otherwise the implementation may be confronted with all kinds of pitfalls, which we have seen already. Let me see. I have 2 more slides on suggestions for research and advanced methods for data collection and analysis, which I promote in the field of agricultural extension, rural development advisory research. I do not know, and I'm asking this to the organizers, if I have still time to do that or whether I will leave it with this and give room for the questions. Nike, can you say something about that?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
You go ahead with the 2 slides, sir.
Yeah, yes, sir. You can elaborate, sir.
Okay, I will do that then because, and I prepared that as final part of this presentation because, yeah, during the preparations of this presentation, it was asked that, yeah, to also say something about research themes and what would be suggestions for research themes and what would be suggestions for research methods. No, I will go further then by this. I really also think that this would really need a separate total webinar because it is a topic in itself. But nevertheless, I think it would benefit farmers a lot and all stakeholders in the agri-food sector to design research on competence frameworks of all the stakeholders involved. But I think also that these should be sufficiently generic and dynamic because also contexts are changing and innovating, and competence needs are changing because there are different ways of performance improvement, etc. So these frameworks should be sufficiently generic and dynamic. Should not be like we now will formulate 1,000 competencies of all these people at the grassroots level or for the rural development advisory professionals. It should be sufficiently generic. Next, I think it would be good to conduct design research on competence-based rural development practices. Design research is very popular at the moment. Together with these the designing of these practices, professional competence rural development advisors will be increased. So there's a parallel approach, a parallel process of designing solutions with farmers and all these stakeholders, and the development of that competence process that is going on. It can also be designed like that. Next, I think it is absolutely necessary to assess the impact of competence-based advice on performance improvement. Since this is the way for improving livelihoods of all who are involved. And as I have been saying, without clear evidence that the rural development advisory activities add value, if that is not clearly demonstrated, this line of activity will be abolished, extinct, deleted, whatever, not continued. So it's absolutely important to show value added. Related to this, I see it as being important to assess the mastery of key competencies of RDA professionals. This will paint a picture of where these professionals stand. As an alternative, competence frameworks can be used as mirrors for self-reflection and self-regulated learning and development. But I think it is crucial to assess the current state of competence mastery of the RDA professionals. Together with that, I believe multi-stakeholder competence needs assessment in food production value chain should be done. So not only concentrating on individuals, but concentrating on the whole production value chain, by which the various actors in the value chain will be participating. Next, I think that appreciative inquiry on the performance improvement potential in the value chain would be welcome. So there is a current state of performance, a current state of competence, and then the question becomes, what is the performance improvement potential and the competence development potential? That would be very welcome. And from an appreciative perspective, of course, appreciative inquiry has become very popular and important. It is not to say you are incompetent, so you should leave, but no, it is more like these are the options, this is the potential to further develop, which is a much more positive approach. I think the results of that will provide a solid foundation for further development initiatives. It's also good to do case studies on performance improvement in practice, also at the grassroots level. These case studies can be used in various rural development advisory activities. Next, I think field experiments on different levels of practical learning facilitated by rural development advisory professionals would be important. Field experiments, this may show that higher levels of facilitation and learning result in significantly better performance, which would support the whole idea of further funding in the activity, because if it shows results, people are more inclined to invest in it. Then I think in agriculture education, I think experimental research on learning results of feedback quality is essential, because education should not be a one-way thing. It is about the interaction, the dialogue, as I've been talking about, and the feedback should be at a high quality. And yeah, I think it is important to show that that high quality is also essential for increasing the quality of teaching and learning, will add to the learning results, and that also will then stimulate all who are involved to increase the quality of extension education. And finally, as we are living in the digital age, I think it would be good to further study the impact analysis of the use of virtual reality, AI applications, and mobile audio visual communication technologies. A lot of that is already going on. I also think that the quality of that needs to be improved. And finally,
okay, we will discuss. Let's finish. Are you listening this one? You can attend a little bit. Now it is about to finish now. You can sit there. Listen.
That was not very clear. Is that a message to me to finalize my presentation? Or shall I proceed with this last slide?
Sir, there was a disturbance, so kindly go ahead, sir.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, I didn't clearly understand that. Then finally, I will share my thoughts on the research methodology. Research methodologies I have seen in publications or in manuscripts actually, which have not been published in the JAEE, some of them are just dreadful. And I will share my thoughts on the sound research methodologies. This topic actually also deserves a full webinar, and I've been giving such a webinar last year already, but there are major suggestions to improve the quality of research in the field of competence-based extension, rural development advisory. I think it is of utmost importance to use advanced methods of data collection and methods of data analysis. For publishing purposes, simply using questionnaires and running all kinds of structural, even that, running all kinds of structural equation modeling using demographic data as independent variables doesn't do it anymore. That's just too basic. I'm suggesting to look at competence self-assessment, but beware of the validity threats that are being imposed by that, like the imposter syndrome, the Dunning-Kruger effect, and all kinds of other biases of self-assessments. When doing assessments, I'm suggesting multi-rater assessments or 360-degree assessments, provided that there is an open learning culture and sufficient level of trust. Another option is doing competence assessments done by licensed assessors, but this obviously is not a cheap solution. There are also assessment centers. Show me how you do it, and then analyze that. But these are even more time-consuming and expensive. But a good supplement with questionnaires that go along with questionnaires is doing structured observations of performance. These observations should be made content and context specific. Otherwise, the data and the results will be too general. Then there are the use of think aloud protocols, which is time consuming. That means that you sit down with farmers or groups and then let them think about problems they have and think aloud, can also be done at an individual level. It's also time consuming, but it results in excellent data. It can also be done by using video stimulated recall. So make videos. It goes a step further than think aloud protocols, and by this method, video recordings are being made, for instance, of farming practices, and these will then be watched by and discussed together. It's also a very strong research method. And finally, there are the case studies on the analysis of work, for instance, on crop protection. And doing case studies is also a strong research method, but time consuming, which I know very well because my dissertation was based on a series of case studies. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of my presentation. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I'm wishing you lots of success with your association of extension professionals and your own work, whatever it may be, policy and practice, extension or education, different positions. Thank you very much. I'm ready to address questions.
Thank you so much, sir, for your elaborate session. And I declare that the session is open for discussion. And with the permission of the August gathering, I would like to start this interaction with one question I have.
Yes.
Can I go ahead, sir?
Sure. Shall I move back? Shall I start?
You can start. You can stop sharing, sir.
You're sharing. Yes. Stop sharing. Exactly. Yes. Okay.
Sir, you have discussed about one case of Ethiopia, where the smallholder farmers participated in low CBT trainings, capacity building trainings, or competence building trainings, I think, and high CBT trainings.
Yes.
And I could learn that there was a 45% increase of yields for the farmers who took part in the high CBT method of trainings.
Yes.
Sir, can you please elaborate for our training refinement? What are the activities that were done under this high CBT? Or what has exactly happened under this, which has resulted in such a high yield increase? Does it include any exposure visits or any demonstrations?
Yes.
The number of trainings?
Yes. These trainings were all carried out in the field with farmer groups. And to begin with, their competencies were analyzed, then the activities were designed and developed, and then of course, training activities were implemented with them. And that included indeed practical training activities, farm activities, on various aspects, like on the side of inputs, the side of seeds then and planting, and everything about harvesting and post-harvest, marketization, etc. So the whole process, farming at grassroots level, was analyzed and taken into these competence-based development activities, and in that sense, it was a very broad and detailed approach. Not just theory, a lot of practice on how to do things.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. And one more small clarification. We all know that Netherlands is one of the few countries where extension is entirely privatized.
Yes.
So, and in India also, we are slowly in the process of privatization, sir. Like we are entering into this public-private partnerships, contract farming, and also the fee is paid by rich farmers when they are cultivating some commercial crops like tea, coffee, and rubber, like that. So in these areas, we are slowly privatizing. I would like to know how the transition from the public funding to private funding happened in Netherlands. Like, which is the sector which got privatized first?
That was not the case. The case was that all extension was privatized at once. And the process was not sudden. It was like a gradual transition from public ministry financing to financing by the sector, like which is now happening too in India. That created a big change in the extension organizations. They suddenly had to become like a business. And that, you know, is the process of marketization and contracting out. During the first years, the Ministry of Agriculture still financed a bit, and there was lowering that financing during a couple of years, and then these organizations needed to be fully independent. And that also happened with research institutes of the ministry. So we had demonstration farms. You have all kinds of courses, winter courses, farm consultants who were going to the farms, plant disease experts, animal disease experts in all kinds of institutions, fisheries, and that was really all privatized. And now there was a difficult process, and it was the process in which the number of students at Wageningen University had been dropped dramatically. So there was at that time, and I'm speaking about the end of the 1990s, there was a couple of years that the government in the Netherlands was thinking to not only privatize the extension organizations and the research institutes, but it was even thinking of discontinuing the financing of Wageningen University itself. So there was a big crisis at the university. And then the idea was started that came in people's minds that it would be maybe a good idea to combine the research institutes with the university itself. And that appeared to be a golden formula to have privately financed research institutes working together with the faculties, the departments at the university, so that you would have the practical side of research and consulting to farms, and the theoretical and the fundamental research at the side of the university, take it together. It became a very strong model, but it left out then the extension organizations, so the practical training centers we had in the Netherlands, very good practical training centers in horticulture, animal, forestry, etc. They were all abandoned. They were all discontinued, at least their financing, and some were able to keep up with private funding. But that has been a difficult process. And of course, the large farms, the more, let's say, commercial farms, didn't have so much trouble with that because they have enough expertise. They did have enough expertise already. But the smaller farms had more difficulties, and they had to find their ways of working in a different way, and started to use other lines of, in this case, competence development, learning and development, to improve their performance. But in all, it has been a tense period, and what I think will happen in India as well is that the privatization will go on. I don't know, of course, but that's what I feel if I see what's happening in your country, a large country, and that it is really necessary for the extension professionals in the extension organizations to refocus their mind from, it is hard to say, but from trying to help, to adding value, because adding value will be the future foundation for funding. That's what I've seen in the Netherlands as well. Does this answer your question a bit?
Yeah, yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Sir, one question from the chat box, and I request if any of the participants have queries, you can directly ask or you can put in the chat box as well. There was one question from Mahesh Chandra, sir. So he is asking, in many developing countries, field extension professionals are burdened with multifarious tasks, even at times not connected with extension activities. Professionalism demands focused extension task for better extension outcomes. In this count situation is different in developed countries where extension professionals have specific roles and they contribute with better extension outcomes. In India, often you don't have to be extension qualified to deliver extension service, including extension education is being done by those who are not having any professional qualification. So this is not possible in the country like Netherlands or any other developed countries. So he's giving the situation in India, sir.
Thank you very much for that clarification.
And this is what is initially I asked.
Yes, that also is related to certification, etc., and standards of rural advisory services. And I'm a strong believer of certification, not always in terms of standardization, but certification, essentially, because I think that the development of competence is a difficult process. It's not only the content matter expertise that makes somebody a professional, extension professional. I think that more is needed, more about knowledge and experience with innovation and transformation, and how to arrive at really the learning and development of those who are involved in the field. And certification can help with that. It is not a guarantee that everything goes better. I think, therefore, it should go along with assessment. That's what I've stressed as well during my presentation. I'm thinking that certification is important, and competence frameworks behind that. Smart competence 2022 smart competences frameworks are important for all who are involved, but also based on that, assessment is really necessary. So I'm pleading for the strong monitoring of what all professionals are doing in the field. If this does not happen, it's like an open end. You can define the competence frameworks, and you could do certification of people by asking, for instance, to participate in training or education or supervised practice, coaching. But if that doesn't go along with the different levels of learning that I have been explaining, I don't think it will help much. So really monitoring and looking at what is going around and what changes are happening and what the individuals and teams in agriculture extension contribute to the performance in the region, in the community, at farm level, at group level, and nothing will happen much. Is that Mahesh Chandra?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I got it.
Is that an answer to your question?
Yeah, I got that.
Okay, sir. This is Professor Rao, working as senior professor and University Head of Agricultural Extension in Extension Education Institute, Rajendra Nagar, Hyderabad. I thank you very much for really you have given a beautiful literature on competencies. If you see your PowerPoint presentation, that's enough for the whole competency literature. I'm very happy to listen to you, but see, I'm having some queries with regard to the conditions in India. Here, the support services are too diverse. Unfortunately, the farmers categories, the small and marginal farmers are very dominant here. Till now, we are still struggling to get the mapping of the competencies required for the extension personnel because of these two diversification. Another important thing is when we are talking about the competencies, when you're talking about the meta competence is a big word in Indian conditions. For example, if you take the organizational competencies, this is the area where we have to put a lot of efforts. Why? Because the government of India has given a lot of importance for the formation of farmer producer organizations and strengthening of those organizations, capacity building of the organizations, and linking them towards the markets. Market-led extension is still a struggling system in India. Even till now, we are not having a formalized market-led extension system in the departments. That is another lacuna. This is the in these conditions. See how we have to go about it. With regard to the mapping of the competencies and developing the competencies for the agri extension personnel. Another very important what Mahesh Chandra told that non-extension people are entering into the services, and that the people, those who are not having the extension experience, they are heading these departments, and they are telling too much about the extension without any base for that. This is the main crux of the problem in India. How do we have to cope about it?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Rao. This is also an important question, or questions actually. Of course, I understand that the conditions in India are different than those in the Netherlands and in Western European or European countries in general, although there's also a large variety and a lot of poverty amongst farmers, but we're talking about different scales, of course. Also, farmers at the grassroots level still are there, but it's not like the smaller marginalized ones in India at that scale. When it comes to mapping competence profiles or frameworks, indeed, those for the extension professionals need to be done. Mapping those frameworks will cost around, according to our standards, cost around a year to 1.5 years as a full project. Mapping those of farmers with the biodiversity, then you have to stratify the population of farmers. And then for each farmer group, there will be a specific framework. And because there's, of course, a relationship between them, I would think that would also take 1 or 2 years to get that done. If that is done, you immediately know the priorities for development. And this is what we have seen a lot in all kinds of associations, professional associations that once these professional profiles or competence profiles are clear, transparent, and then everybody's looking at them and they are being used for selection, hiring, further development, etc. And it would not be unique for farming, because there's various associations like in medicine, healthcare in general, engineering, trade, financial services, you name it. There's competence frameworks out there that do exist, and they resemble one another a bit, but they're also quite different. And my advice is always to look at the behavioral side, but also to the content side. Anyway, that is about the development of these competencies. When it comes to the intrusion of the invasion of non-professionals, non-extension professionals in the extension activities, because of the marketization, I would say, okay, what lesson does that yield for the extension system? I do not know the professionalism of these people that are intruding. but it can be that they have unique knowledge and experience by which they can really increase the yield of farmers. And if that is the case, it is something to look at, because if they can, and the agriculture extension professionals cannot, then the extension professionals have a serious problem. The other way around, if the non-professional extension service deliverers are not really doing professional performance, if their performance is non-professional and they are not producing improved value and development, then there is something to point at and to say, well, look at the extension professionalism that yields better results. And I would say a comparison is needed. But if the state or the nation is moving towards that market-led agricultural development, then you are directly in a competition position between all the service deliverers. And we've seen that as well in the Netherlands when extension was privatized. Then immediately you will see people coming in, trying to pick their grain, able or capable of doing that or not. Is there not a question? So much for many people, and all kinds of malpractices, non-professionalism comes in, and that is then something to warn for. But you can do studies. I would suggest to do studies in which you compare the service delivered by these market-led people and those from your own organization. Yeah, I think that is the best advice I can give. I don't know, Professor Rao, if that answers your question. It's a difficult question, actually, with lots of politics coming in.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, sir.
Sir, Mulder sir, just I have one query. Nowadays, we are talking much of even our ministry is also very much interested in digitizing and integrating digital applications in farming. So now, in view of all these things, as well as initially in the first slide itself, you have mentioned that climate change and carbon trading and solar farming, we are coming up with all recent ways of farming is coming into picture. Now, keeping these things in view, now how would it be possible as such having the mapping of farmers profile and the grassroots level extension competency profile itself is a big issue here.
Mm-hmm.
And how to keep it what you call changing with the time, because it has become so dynamic now. It is not just giving the advisories, how we give and the content, everything has become too dynamic, especially with the advent of digital applications. Now, how could a country like India could cope up? Because here I would like to just add one aspect which we felt. One of our students' PhD study was on learning styles of farmers and learning styles of extension functionaries.
Yeah.
So how to match these things and increase the competencies of farmers or increase their learning abilities. So when we did that, so various extension methods the extension functionaries are using, and when we contacted the farmer, though their learning styles are varying, but most of them, they are very much comfortable and convenient that farm and home visits are best in building their capacity. But having farm and home
जो
visit,
proposal online में ना वो ADC IR पे दिखा रहा है, लेकिन वो कह रहा है कि मैंने तो पहले ही कर दिया ये,
yes, sir,
उसके बाद कहाँ से जाता proposal फिर वो?
please mute. So how far this would be possible?
अच्छा वो तो लेकिन इसमें ऑनलाइन में चेंज नहीं हो रहा है, वो तो कह रहे हैं कि मैंने कर दिए।
We have
ADC IR से मैंने बात करी थी डॉक्टर मिश्रा से।
Thank you very much. I understood the question well then.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we live in a digital age, and India is one of the countries that is very, very advanced in digitalization. There are lots of digital experts
Yes.
but who go around all over the world. Also in the Netherlands, we see lots of Indians who have excellent computer skills, advanced ones, and who are working, for instance, with our chip machine factory.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that apart from that, farming and grassroots levels is a quite other story. Indeed, there the digitalization also enters.
Yes.
It begins with phones, smartphones. It began already with mobile phones, the old simple Nokias, to share market prices for individuals and to get an individual bank account and to pay by phone. I've seen that a lot in Africa taking place. And from that, it goes to the smartphone. Of course, you then have to have internet or a bundle with internet, 4G, nowadays 5G, whatever. But then can people and maybe can share share mobile phones, I don't know, or share subscriptions. They can make pictures and send them to researchers or research institutes showing this. I see this disease in my crop. Now,
Yes.
that is all already happening a lot also in your country. I've seen presentations about that already at conferences in your country. So that happens a lot, but that means also the investment is needed in communities at the grassroots level. That means to be able to do that, there should be profit making. First of all, of course, the sustainability of the livelihood.
Yes.
But that directly after that, it comes, can I enter the market? And what do I need to know about market knowledge, etc. And then it becomes knowledge about price setting and negotiation, and etc. etc. And that changes fast, maybe faster than we want. I see the benefits of it all, the whole digital world, and that we are connected, that I can present here for you in India. I see the benefits of that, but there are also hazards about that, because then everybody is hooked on the internet. And when the internet is shut down for all of us, or for you, what will happen then? Then you don't have access to resources, banking,
Yes.
communication, etc. That is the really main problem I see with the whole internet community, the Internet of Things. Everything will, we always said, if electricity breaks down, the world breaks down. But now it becomes, if the internet breaks down, you're isolated again. And that is, I think, that can happen too easily. So that has to be protected, that cannot happen. But I'm not sure whether we as citizens are able to change that process, because that is in the hands of the big IT corporations.
Yeah.
But for that, and to cope with all these things, I think extension professionals, rural development advisors have to have the mentality and attitude of continuing professional development, and fast. I mean, you cannot take a year off to think about what will be the consequences of the internet economy. It's impossible, because daily work is moving on and moving on. So I think the workplace of the RDA advisor should also be turned into a learning place.
Yes.
And the extension organization, RDA organization, should become a learning organization that facilitates the continuous development of the RDA professionals. And what I heard before is that if people get all kinds of other tasks and do not have sufficient time for their core tasks doing extension activities,
Ah.
then of course I understand that becomes a difficult issue. So I'm pleading also for state financing and national financing towards organizations to make it possible also via taxing, by taxing tax systems regulations to promote continuous learning and development also at the workplace, like what farmers get in terms of facilities. RDA professionals should also get in terms of facilities, like the directors of the institutions get all kinds of facilities for developing. Lower levels should also get that. And the link and the leverage for that, I think, could be the competence management system, because once you have for your organization laid out competence management system, it urges higher levels and governors to really look into the support of that learning and development of all the people who are involved.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Reddy. Really, we are very much impressed, and thank you very much for enlightening us on the competency management system as well as the competency framework. So we have one distinguished guest in this galaxy of the participants, representing Government of India, Sri Sanjay Kalekarji. Are you there? Kalekarji.
Yes.
Now I request Kalekarji to share his thoughts or give any inputs in this direction. Thank you very much, sir, for your participation.
Thank you. Namaskar. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Sanjay Kalekarji.
Respected Emirate Professor Dr. Martin Goodar, sir, Director Extension Education, PGTSU Hyderabad, Director EI Hyderabad, all the faculty of EI and Society of Extension Professionals. I'm very happy that I could hear the guest lecture of respected Mulder sir. Though I joined late, but I'm very happy that I get some ideas through this his lecture. The challenges, global challenges, in this current global challenges, what should be the competency of the extension professionals? Though there is a different situation in country like India and Netherlands, but the need for the future, what should be the need and how our extension professional should have competency. I'm very happy that some of the points he has guided to us is very important, just like global challenges, then that is nitrogen emission problem regarding the livestock, other issues regarding the Indian extension situation, that the total budget, very less budget, 0.7% budget, which is very few for the extension and agriculture. Then he has pointed out the one that I have learned, that the need of on-farm extension education is better than the education given to the farmer in the training institute or in the laboratory. That is the main point. So on-farm extension to the farmer is very important. I'm very happy, and I'm here that I could hear the lecture of Emirates professor. I'm very thankful that he has spared more than 2 hours time for the Indian extension professionals. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, Kalekarji, for sparing your time in spite of your very, very busy schedule and listening to us, our Emeritus Professor's lecture. Thank you, sir. Mulder sir, I have one doubt. That open innovation involves many stakeholders, and that leads to team performance, wherein interpersonal, project as well as content competencies you have specified. Could you add any other competencies which can enhance the performance, team performance, like what are the changing contemporary situations, any digital competency like that, or any entrepreneurship abilities? Such kind of competencies can be roped in.
Yes, I can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah.
For instance, to start with the last one, the entrepreneurial competence. We've done much more follow-up research on the first one with Thomas Lanz. There we discovered that opportunity identification is extremely important. And we tried to develop that competence in people. Opportunity identification in the first place, and then the realization of these opportunities. That is the core of entrepreneurship. You see a lot of things going on in where you live, in your community, village, town, city, whatever. And you think, okay, there I see an opportunity.
हाँ मैं डॉक्टर महेश्वर बोल रहा था IBRI से मेरा एक फॉरेन डेपुटेशन.
Then you see there I can start a line of activity, like farmers who have seen that farming as such is not their future anymore. That they have seen that they should develop other activities. These sideline activities can become their major activities later on. I've given examples of that. So then you see, for instance, the opportunity, hey, I've got a farm, but I've got things to sell, and I do not bring them to the market, but I sell that directly at my farm. And that farm trade, so to say, can become a major activity of the organization. We have, for instance, in the neighborhood where I live, a farm that produces eggs. So they have a lot of chicken, and they are very high quality. There's a quality guarantee and a quality label on it, and a sustainability label, etc., etc. And people buy those things, those eggs at the farm. They also have, of course, a lot of trade with all kinds of shops. But that line of business has become very popular and important for them. Other farms have developed other ways of earning money. They thought, okay, my dairy farm does not yield enough income. With the difficult decisions being made by the government during the last 20 years, it's practically impossible to further innovate that and bring it to a scale that is profitable. So I will decrease that part of my farm, and I will use the stables, the barns, or whatever else. For instance, as I said, storing mobile homes, which is quite popular here in the Netherlands. And so farmers, if they don't see a future and are enough entrepreneurial and do not think I have to do what my father or mother did, and I have to do what my grandfather and mother did, I have to do what all my ancestors did, because otherwise they will think about me like I'm a failure. They can also start new lines of business and new activities in the rural area. It is not like abandoning the farm activity and going to the city, to the town, to try to find a job, because that, I know that from India as well, is in most of them not the solution, because there will be no job in most cases. And developing new lines of activities, sometimes even together as a community, or with likewise thinking people in different communities. You can set up new lines of activities and try to be entrepreneurial, see the opportunity, see it, and then think, I will grab that opportunity and I will make it a success. I will realize small, but later on maybe a bigger enterprise. That is on the side of entrepreneurship. When it comes to open innovation, there's a lot to say there. I had various these competencies in my slides, but I was yesterday, the day before yesterday, I was thinking, well, that becomes much too much. So I deleted those slides. But there's a lot of detail that can be provided also on open innovation, like what you have is indeed the teamwork, but also checking balances. Is the profit that we can produce together balanced well? Can I make enough profit given the liaison with the other person or the other organization? And what can we do in terms of market needs? Can we together find an innovative idea, an innovative product, an innovative service that can be our mutual or common product or service, a common asset for the future? And then it gets into trust. Because many cases people are being misled and trust is misplaced. So trust analysis is always also very important. Contracting, if it is starting activity becomes larger and is making profit, then contracting becomes very important. And I'm saying this because we've seen many problems with that, not only in this farming, but in all kinds of activities in the economy, that if there's unequal balances in contracts, people who are the creative ones and produce the actual innovations may not get the benefit or the profit out of it because of the contracts. So contracting is very important. Ownership, who is actually the owner of an open innovation. I have invested 60%, the other has invested maybe 40%. Well, is then that outcome and the division of the benefit also comparable, etc., etc. So it's all about contracting. What I can do is I can, if you want, add the slides that I deleted to the end of this presentation, to the end of this PowerPoint presentation, and then you make that available and you find much more detail on the studies that I've been presenting. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Sir, good evening, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, my name is Dr. Shivakrishna, sir. Working in Extension Wing, Krishi Vignana Kendram of University, sir.
Can you switch on your video, Shiva?
Yeah, he is with us. He is speaking from outside.
Okay, just.
Sir, small, sir. Sir, is there any framework to quantify the professional competency of farmers, sir? Why? Because we working with day in and day out, we are working with farmers, sir. So we would like to know the professional competency of farmers, how to quantify. Is there any framework? I would like to know, sir.
Yes, I do not know. I've presented frameworks of farmers. If you look into the dissertation of Chalachu, Tarakechne, And the other ones I presented, you will find those frameworks. And I do not really understand the question about quantification, but all these frameworks can be used to assess farming expertise. And one by one, an assessment can take place. What achievement level in terms of all these competencies have been met by these farmers, and you can also prioritize development issues. So you've got the framework as this is the ideal, this will be the best, and then there's the framework, the profile of the individual farmer or a group of farmers, and you can say, okay, now we are going to prioritize development areas, and that has been done a lot and still being done a lot. This is also one of the key assets, the key strengths of this approach. So yes, there are there, and go into the publications that I have been sharing. And if you can't find enough or want more information, to all of you actually, I'm very open to further communication. I've shared my my details. And I assume that this PowerPoint presentation will be shared somehow, and I will put it on my website, mulder.nl, mmulder.nl. And at that website, mulder.nl, you will find this one then, but also many other publications and presentations. And I always do that for free.
Okay,
Right.
sir.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other queries? If all queries got exhausted, then I request all the participants to switch on your videos for a group photo. Thank you. Still more videos. If any queries or doubts are left over, feel free to put it in the chat box so that we'll send it to Dr. Martin, sir, and we'll get back to you with the replies.
There's many people who do not have video on. Is that possible?
Yeah, we request few more. Please unmute your videos.
All participants are requested to switch on your videos. Still more.
First, we have to improve this competence.
It's nice to see you. I was speaking to a screen without people. It was always strange. Nice to see you.
Okay.
We have 46 participants on board, but we see only few videos. Please switch on quickly. Okay.
This is it.
So thank you, all of you. Now we have come to the end of this webinar. I request my colleague, Dr. Ravindra Naik, to propose vote of thanks for such an elaborate and beautiful session taken by Dr. Martin, sir. So we await for another webinar talk from you, sir, shortly.
Good evening, all. I am audible.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Good evening, all. It has been such an honor to be a part of this wonderful event. It gives me an immense pleasure to propose formal vote of thanks on behalf of the Society of Extension Professionals on the occasion of this intellectually stimulating and inspiring webinar by a renowned academician, Emeritus Professor Dr. Martin Mulder. It's my distinct honor to profusely thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. V. Praveen Rao sir, who is a source of inspiration and abundant motivation for taking up these type of activities by the Society of Extension Professionals, Hyderabad, Telangana, India. Thank you, sir, for all the support, guidance, and mentoring the society for coming out with such intellectually stimulating lectures and series of webinars. I am delighted to extend my heartfelt gratitude to today's guest speaker, Emeritus Professor Dr. M. Martin Mulder, for his
I lost contact.
Voice not coming. Dr. Jagan Mohan Reddy, not audible. I think we lost contact with them. Yeah.
global challenges and various aspects related to the professional competence building. Sir, your presentation and your commitment towards making such a wonderful presentation as the audience covered across the pan India. So we have different spectrum of the audiences, especially the students, I believe, and the Society of Extension Professionals strongly believes that this thought-provoking lecture is going to inspire these budding young professionals to reorient their perspectives towards future extension research. As you have already covered about the future areas of research for BSc, MSc, and PhD scholars. Sir, we are highly thankful to you for all these things. We have, this program in fact was conceptualized in the month of January, but you have made such an elaborate and exhaustive presentation in such a way that it has covered everything about the professional competence. And I think this has opened up a new area in the stream of extension vis-a-vis all the agriculture extension or veterinary, dairy, and all the extension research domain, so that it definitely is going to come out with new areas of research in this particular domain. And your coverage of the advanced methods of data collection and analysis and all these things, I strongly believed that the students got immense benefit, and also the young professionals. So once again, from the bottom of the heart and on behalf of the Society of Extension Professionals, we profusely thank you, sir, for sparing your valuable time at this age, at this time, and the series of preparations you have made, covering all the points so that not to miss anything, has really inspired us to think more about this particular topic. The Society of Extension Professionals thank all the heads of the departments from various parts of the country. So we have Dr. Mahesh Chandra sir from IVRI, we have Dr. K. Ponnuswamy sir from NDRI, we have retired professor, the Joint Director Extension from IARI, Dr. Vijay Raghavan sir, and many of the extension stalwarts from across the different parts of the country. And thank you, Mahesh Chandra sir, for your excellent feedback about this particular program. It's all because of the Professor Martin Mulder sir, who has made this possible. We also thank immensely our Director of Extension, Dr. Sudharani Madam, also the President of Society of Extension Professionals, for mentoring, guiding, and coordinating for this particular program to happen in such a successful event. We also thank our university head and senior professor, Dr. I. Srinivas Rao sir, for giving his remarks on the program and also guiding wherever it is required. Thank you very much, sir. We thank the General Secretary of the Society of Extension Professionals, Dr. Jagan Mohan Reddy, sir, who is also the Director of EI for such a wonderful program, who has taken a lot of pain in this organizing such a program. Our special thanks to the distinguished guest of today, that is Sanjay Kalekar, sir, from the ministry, who is representing the Ministry of Agriculture, Government of India, for his keen participation and also interacting with the renowned guest speaker. We also thank all the faculty from across India and also from the state agriculture universities of respective states, and especially the University of, the Professor Jaishankar Telangana State Agriculture University, and also our neighboring universities. Thank you all, and wide rounds of applause to all of you, and thanks for all your participation, which has made this program a memorable event. We thank all the people who are directly and indirectly involved in the successful organization of this particular event, and we especially thank Dr. Vasanta Madam for moderating this program in an excellent move. So we thank our photographer, all the cast and crew who are involved in successful organizing this particular webinar. I thank once again to all those people who are behind the screen and for making this program such a successful event. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Mullar, sir, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all these nice words. I'll send you my heart.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All the best.
Kalekar, sir, ji, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mulder sir. Thank you very much, Kalekar ji.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving your time. Thank you, ma'am. Director of Extension, Sudharani ma'am, our President of SEP, and our Treasurer, Dr. I. Srinivas Rao sir. All the SEP members for your patronage, for your overwhelming support for all the webinars.
So Professor Martin Mulder, sir, will be in touch with you and will communicate through mail, sir, today again.
Good, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank
That's
you.
fine. Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mulder, and bye.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. We declare this webinar is ended and terminated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So, మనకు మంచిదే